Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Only Stupid Answers. My name is DJ Wooldridge, and I am here to talk about the latest episode of Lovecraft Country. If you've been following these reviews, you're probably used to seeing me have a guest. Unfortunately, my guest for this week was not able to make it. They're a little under the weather, so it's just me. Hoo boy! What an episode to tackle solo. This is Season 1, Episode 9 of Lovecraft Country, titled Rewind 1921. With Hippolyta at the helm, Leti, Tick, and Montrose travel to 1921 Tulsa in an effort to save Dee. This episode was directed by Jeffrey Nachmanoff and written by Misha Green, Jonathan I. Kidd, and Sonia Winton Adompton. So this is Lovecraft Country's big swing at a time travel story a la Back to the Future, and weirdly, it's a lot more harrowing. I couldn't tell you why. What's the difference between something like Back to the Future and Lovecraft Country, and how time travel might affect the characters in those stories? It's a mystery that we may never solve. But we don't start off with harrowing, emotion-demolishing time travel. We start with what feels like a pretty traditional penultimate episode where we're getting all the pieces positioned into place to set up for the finale. And I'm going to be honest with you, it had me worried a little bit. I'm like, okay, here we go. This is just a place-setting episode. This is just to get everybody where we need them to be to set off all the cool explosions at the finale. But it's definitely not where the episode ended. But let's start off with the setup here. All right. So obviously, with the fallout of last week's episode, Dee is still sick with the curse. She's becoming one of the creatures that was stalking her in the previous episode. This is a curse that Lancaster has put on her, and our team has no other option but to reach out to Christina. Atticus wants to give her the lost pages, but of course, Leti already gave them to her to get invulnerability. But Ruby is confident that Christina will help them out of devotion to her. Christina does show up, and she does offer to help as long as Atticus will show up at Artem at the autumnal equinox, say that 3 times fast, without any muss or fuss. He's just supposed to show up without a fight, which it's a good sign whenever you have to make somebody promise or something like that. So I'm going to be honest with you, a lot of like the dynamics here, a little bit complicated about who has what pages in the book and all that stuff. But basically Lancaster has what they need, but Lancaster's locked it away and Lancaster's dying. Christina, in the guise of William, even goes to visit Lancaster as he's dying, and we get to see more of his Frankenstein's monster-esque torso. Apparently the police have been kidnapping and murdering black men to help prolong Lancaster's life, which is awful. And I guess everybody's goal in the Sons of Adam is to live forever, which is great. Nobody who's ever wanted to live forever has done anything bad for any reason, so let's not question that, I guess. But Lancaster appears to be officially done for. William/Christina literally watches the light leave his eyes because Christina's the bad guy. But Ruby's not convinced of that. Ruby, after a discussion with Leti, thinks to question Christina's goals, and Christina, to her credit, is upfront with Ruby that yes, she plans on killing Atticus so she can achieve immortality and, as she puts it, experience an eternity of firsts. And Ruby does not question it. I have suggested throughout these reviews that Ruby could be kind of put into an antagonist role, and while I don't think she really fits the mold of what would traditionally be viewed as an antagonist, she is definitely throwing her lot in with Christina, which is probably not the best decision for her, not to judge her life. I don't think it's going to end well for anybody. But anyway, Christina sort of helps the team. She resets Dee's curse so that the whole cycle will start over again. But our team needs the Book of Adam to actually fix what's going on with Dee, which the only way to do that would be to go back in time, which is where Hippolyta comes in. She returns from her magical mystery tour and offers to help the gang go back in time and find the book. And she tells us a little bit more about her journey. She specifically says that she was on Earth 504 for the equivalent of 200 years. And she talks about the multiverse in terms of infinite possibilities and infinite wisdom, which she wants to use to save her daughter, which is really cool. Hippolyta is not in this episode a lot, but she's really cool. So they go back to the observatory and she plugs into the multiverse machine, not time machine, multiverse machine, because I guess she's a motherboard now, or she becomes the motherboard to this machine because she's got technological components now. And she opens a portal for Atticus, Leti, and Montrose to go back to 1921, literally hours before the Tulsa Massacre. Why didn't they go back a week earlier? If they said the episode, I didn't catch it, you can let me know in the comments, but this is a classic situation with time travel where it's like, let's go back right before the most harrowing instant in our history so that we can relive that moment. It's like, no, just a week, a year, 2 days, a different time. Just pick a different time. We know that book's been in the wall, or we're at that house for however long. Literally pick any other time other than this time. So they head back to George and Montrose's childhood home, which is right next to Dora's home, which is Atticus's mother. And we meet Montrose's father, played by William Catlett, who you may know as Lala from Black Lightning. And Montrose's father, Virgin, is not a good dude. Montrose picked up his legacy of abuse from somewhere, and it was from Burton, who seems to have a sense of his son's homosexuality and is not happy about it. And we kind of get to see George not stand up for his brother, and Dora actually does a better job for that. And then also Dora's father, Gilbert, played by Keith Arthur Bolden, who's also from Black Lightning. He plays Alvin Pierce, aka Jefferson Pierce's father. Then adult grown-up Montrose books it. Atticus and Leti think he's going to go warn George. That's not the case, but we'll get to that in a second. But this leads Leti and Atticus to split up. Right before Leti and Atticus acknowledge to each other that they both know that she's pregnant, and she says that we should name him George, and Atticus is like, I know, because I'm seeing the future. Anyway, they separate. Earlier in the episode, when they're trying to fix the situation with Dee, it involves needing blood from her closest blood relative. And it's at this point that Montrose reveals that George might be Atticus's father, which Atticus does not take great. And to his credit, I know he's had a lot of reveals that he hasn't necessarily handled the best, but in his defense, listen, he's had to deal with a lot, all right? There's been a lot thrown onto Atticus's plate in a short amount of time. So Atticus drives and catches up to Montrose at the park. That we know from their personal history, that's where they're going to get beat up. And Montrose reveals that he's not trying to warn George. He's trying to save a boy named Thomas, who seems to be Montrose's first love, really. There might have been other boys prior to that, but this seems to be a real key moment for Montrose, which makes sense considering all the horrific things that are literally seconds away from happening to him. He wants to save Thomas for a variety of reasons, but not the least of which is the fact of the way they ended things. And they were directed by Hippolyta to not change anything. Again, classic time travel rules unless you're Terminator. Don't mess with the timeline. So Atticus is forced into a position to convince his dad to let this poor boy get killed, and Montrose makes it an impassioned plea. It's a moment for Montrose really asserts that even if he saves this boy, it won't affect him being Atticus's father, because that's one of the things that matters most to him. Maybe he doesn't believe that as much as he thinks he does, because he does let the boy die, which is probably good for the timeline, but it's harrowing to watch, and everything that happens from here on is tremendously challenging. And I think in recent pop culture history, in HBO history, we've been presented with the Tulsa Massacre, and it's a really harrowing depiction in Watchmen. But I think the difference between that show and this show is the fact that all we see in Watchmen is the carnage, is the aftermath, is that part of the history. What we see a little bit more here in this show is the lives that people led. And it's like my life now. It's like my neighbors' lives. It's like any suburb in America. Obviously, we live in a more modern time, but it's just people living their lives and knowing what is going to happen to them adds to the horror of it. This episode really hammers home the idea that they did not know, especially the children, as their prom is being canceled, had no idea what was going to happen to them. And that adds to the terror. I was very emotionally moved by everything that happened in this episode. So Montrose and Atticus are there when George and Dora show up, and then the white gang shows up to torment these poor children. And throughout the show, we've been presented with the story of a man with a bat that comes and saves these children from this white gang. And as people in the comments have pointed out or suggested, this is probably Atticus. A lot of people assumed this is where he traveled in the portal the first time before it was revealed that he went to the future. Of course, that's not the case, but it does end up being Atticus. He is there to come in as the man with the bat, and it also connects to his dream in the very first episode when he imagines Jackie Robinson. He comes in, quote unquote, like Jackie Robinson, and he helps ward off this mob of people. And props to the direction and cinematography and effects, because that first bat hit on the first guy, the grotesque smile leading to the dawning of awareness, leading to the bat hitting the face, was so well executed that I honestly think that actor had his teeth knocked out. I know intellectually that can't be the case, but part of me is like, oh, that guy got his teeth knocked out. And Atticus gets to save the day and have a great hero moment. Meanwhile, across town, Leti gets attacked by her own mob. Fortunately, she has the spell protecting her, and as they shoot at her, the bullets bounce off, and she's taken in by Dora's family. And she very specifically does not tell them what's to come. They decide to hunker down in the house. They are well armed, and you'd like to think that would help them in a situation like this, but it does not. As in the real world, it does not always. So as the house comes under attack, Leti starts looking for the book, and we get introduced to the family in pretty quick succession, and unfortunately I don't have in my notes who I'm calling Dora's grandma. Dora's grandma finds her and immediately assumes that she's there to rob the house, and Leti convinces her that she's from the future because unfortunately she is better at retaining information than I am, because again, I'm calling this character Dora's grandma, and I don't even know if she's the grandma as the relationship. I'm assuming there is. And she's able to tell her about Atticus' birthmark and all the information she needs to be convinced that Letty's from the future. She gives Leti the book that they are after, and she asks Leti to pray with her as the house burns down, which is another really emotionally challenging scene. The show does not let its audience off the hook of dealing with one of these touchstones of horror in American history, this atrocity. And so Leti is there for that moment. She is protected by her spell of invulnerability. Very confident that that spell is also going to protect the book. I would have been a little bit worried that the book would have burned up, but I guess it's like a force field. So sure, it doesn't. That and her clothes are fine. And then she takes the longest walk imaginable to return the book to the portal. On the Discord, Robbie asked, also, why did Leti just walk? I needed her to be booking it back to the hotel. And I admit that I had the exact same feeling. I wanted to run. Although on an emotional level, you get how literally what she just witnessed would be so emotionally traumatizing that it would be hard to motivate yourself to move any quicker. And also from a production standpoint, her walking through all those explosions unaffected was really cool looking and really dramatic, and really was a great emotional capstone to everything that we had just gone through in this time travel story, including Montrose looking over the scene and reciting people's names and stories that he remembered from growing up there as the world that he knew when he was a child burned down. And this is a really important thing, I think, with good time travel stories, especially if you're dealing with something of character going back into their own history. It's a way to dramatize that act of looking at your own past and reconciling it in the present. Good time travel stories are less about like, will they change the future? And more about the person changing themselves. Back to the Future, like I mentioned earlier, is about a young man reconciling the fact that his parents were also youngsters just like him, and maybe he's not so different from them, and maybe in a way they can learn from each other. And I think that's an effective part of time travel storytelling that we see here. Obviously, these characters cannot change the past, just like none of us can change the past. Tulsa 1921 happened. We can't change it now. What we can do is change the way we move forward, use that information, use those experiences people have, use those experiences that might be part of some of our history, and use it to become better people now, and use it to make our country better now. And I think this story touches on that, specifically in the case of Montrose. He cannot save Thomas. He cannot change the things that he did with his son, but he can become a better person. And if I were betting a man, I would say that will probably culminate in him sacrificing his life for Atticus in the upcoming episode. I do not know that, but that seems to be the direction he might be heading, a way of him redeeming himself. We also have a question here from Danny, who asks, what did y'all think about Tick closing the loop by saving his parents? And I thought this was a very interesting moment because, again, it goes back to that idea of reconciling your own history. Montrose may have doubts about his decision to end up getting married to Dora and raising Atticus as a son, but it literally saves his life in more ways than one. And again, like I was talking about earlier, this dramatizes that internal discovery. Not only is Atticus the man with the bat that he remembers, but also Atticus is part of what gives his life purpose and is what's motivating him to become better now. So the episode ends with Leti taking the long walk home. Hippolyta is unable to maintain the portal, so Atticus jumps through and kind of roots her on. She goes all out, starts levitating, her hair turns blue. It's incredibly epic, and Leti and Montrose are able to make it through with the book. They now have what they need to save Dee. I was crying, and the day is saved, I guess. We'll see you in next week's episode. In the preview, it looks very much like, hey, they're really emphasizing, hey, this is the last episode. Will Atticus die? I doubt it, but it's possible. There's so many strong characters in the show that any one of them could lead their own series, which is part of what makes the show so exciting to watch. But I think this was another benchmark episode for the show. It is definitely one that will stick with me for a very long time. Let me know in the comments what you thought about the episode, anything I missed, and what you think is going to happen in the finale. Please like and subscribe and all that jazz. I will be back next week, hopefully with a guest, to discuss the finale. Please check out our reviews of The Boys. We've got reviews of all of those episodes up here at youtube.com/OnlyStupidAnswers. And there's new Only Stupid Answers podcasts every Monday, wherever podcasts are sold. But if you want to know more about that and other projects we got going on, you can look at all of it at OnlyStupidAnswers.com. If you want to support the show, you can do that at patreon.com/OnlyStupidAnswers. And you can follow me at DJ Talks Trash, and you can follow the show at Only Stupid Answers, but you're going to want to yank the vowels out of stupid on Twitter. Thanks, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.